I was 23 when I rented the lower half of an old duplex in a quiet residential neighborhood. I was working closing shifts as an assistant manager at a local grocery store, so I usually didn't get home until midnight or later. The neighborhood was mostly older couples and families, so by the time I pulled into my driveway, the whole street was usually completely dead. It was a Tuesday night. I was in the living room eating dinner on the couch and unwinding. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't loud, just 3 regular solid knocks. I muted the TV and waited for a second, thinking maybe I imagined it over the noise of the show. I got up and walked to the door to look through the peephole. The porch light was off, but there was a street light across the road that lit up the yard enough to see. There was nobody there. I figured it was my upstairs neighbor coming home late, and maybe he bumped the door by accident, or maybe it was just the old house settling. I locked the deadbolt and went back to the couch. 2 nights later, I had the day off and was up late on my computer. At almost exactly 1:30 a.m., I heard it again. 3 knocks. This time it was slightly louder. I got up immediately and walked quietly to the door. I looked through the peephole. Again, there was no one on the porch. But this time, I noticed the motion sensor light on the corner of the detached garage was turned on. I stared through the peephole for a few minutes, expecting to see someone walk down the driveway, but nobody did. It freaked me out a little, but I told myself it was probably a stray raccoon setting off the light, and maybe some bored teenagers playing a prank with the knocking. The following week is when things changed. It was a Monday night. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water. It was earlier this time, maybe around 11:30 p.m. I heard the 3 knocks again. But they didn't come from the front door. They came from the kitchen window, which was on the side of the house facing a narrow alleyway between my unit and a tall wooden privacy fence. I completely froze. The blinds were drawn, but the kitchen light was on. I knew whoever was out there could probably see my shadow if I moved closer to the glass. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the middle of the kitchen. A few seconds later, there were 3 more knocks on the same window. It wasn't hurried. It was slow and deliberate. I quietly reached over and flipped the kitchen light switch off. As soon as the room went dark, the knocking stopped. I stood in the dark for what felt like 10 minutes. I slowly walked into the living room and grabbed my phone. I was about to call the police non-emergency line, just thinking there was a creep in the neighborhood. That's when I heard the knocking move to the back of the house. 3 knocks on my bedroom window. Then, a few seconds later, 3 knocks on the sliding glass door in the living room. They were circling the house. I dialed 911 and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was prowling around my windows. While I was on the phone, the knocking made its way back to the front door. 3 heavy knocks. I crept down the hallway so I could see the front door without being entirely in the room. I didn't go to the peephole this time. The house was completely silent except for my own breathing. Then I heard the front doorknob slowly turn. It turned until it clicked hard against the deadbolt. After that, the person pushed against the door, testing how strong the frame was. It wasn't a violent shove, just steady, heavy pressure. The dispatcher told me officers had just turned onto my street. As soon as the police cruiser's headlights swept across my front windows, I heard heavy footsteps sprint off my porch and into the yard next door. The police searched the property with flashlights, but they didn't find anyone in the yards or down the street. However, when one of the officers came inside to take my statement, he asked me to come outside and look at something. In the mud right beneath my kitchen window, there was a clear set of footprints. But they weren't facing the window. They were facing the street. The officer explained that whoever it was hadn't been trying to look inside. They had their back against the house, knocking backward against the siding while keeping an eye on the road. They were acting as a lookout. Then the officer took me around to the back of the house. There was a second set of footprints near the sliding glass door. The second set was much larger, and the mud around the door frame was totally trampled. They also found long scratch marks near the locking mechanism on the sliding track. While the first guy was walking around knocking on the glass to keep my attention focused on the noise, someone else had been quietly trying to pry open the back door. The officer told me if I had turned on the back porch light or gone outside to confront the knocker, the second guy would have had a clear opening to force his way in. I never found out who it was or if they ever got caught. I moved out of that duplex a few months later when my lease ended. I still don't answer the door at night for any reason, and I always keep a rubber wedge shoved into the track of my back sliding door. I was 20 years old and living in my first apartment. It was a cheap one-bedroom on the ground floor of a massive complex, mostly filled with college students and people working odd hours. I was taking classes during the day and waiting tables at night, so I was usually dead on my feet by the time I got home. I didn't know my neighbors well. We mostly just kept to ourselves. It was a Thursday night. I had just gotten off a brutal shift and was sitting on my couch watching YouTube, trying to wind down. It was around 2:15 in the morning. Out of nowhere, there were 3 quick knocks at my front door. It wasn't a hard knock. It sounded frantic, like someone tapping with their knuckles. I muted my laptop and stared at the door. I figured it was just a drunk neighbor at the wrong apartment. I waited for them to realize their mistake and leave. But about 10 seconds later, the knocking happened again, a little louder this time. I got up and walked over to the door. I looked through the peephole. Standing in the brightly lit hallway was a girl. She looked young, maybe around my age. She was wearing a baggy sweatshirt and she was hugging her arms like she was freezing, even though it was the middle of July. She was looking down at the floor, crying. I can't lie, my first instinct was to open the door and ask what was wrong. She looked genuinely distressed, but for whatever reason, something didn't sit right with me. I lived at the very end of the hallway. To get to my door, she would have had to walk past at least 6 other apartments. I didn't unlatch the deadbolt. I just leaned close to the door and asked her if she was okay. She jumped a little when I spoke. She looked up at the peephole and told me her boyfriend had just kicked her out of his car and drove off with her purse. She said her phone was dead and begged me to let her come inside just to use my charger so she could call her mom. Her voice was shaking, but there was something weird about the way she was talking. It sounded slightly rehearsed. And while she was crying, she kept glancing to her left, toward the blank wall right beside my doorframe. I told her I would just grab my phone and call the police for her so they could come help. As soon as I said the word police, her crying stopped entirely. Her face just went blank. She didn't say anything else. She just kept looking at the wall. Because of the fisheye lens on the peephole, the edges of my view were slightly distorted. I shifted my weight and angled my head to look as far left as the peephole would allow. That's when it hit me. Just barely visible in the distortion, pressed flat against the wall outside, was the sleeve of a thick black jacket. Whoever it was, they were standing with their back to the wall, intentionally hiding in the blind spot of my peephole. My stomach dropped. I stepped back from the door. I didn't say a word. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed 911 and put it to my ear. The hallway outside was dead quiet. Then, I heard the girl whisper something. A second later, a massive impact hit the door. The whole frame shuddered. Someone had just kicked it full force. I backed away into the kitchen. Another kick hit the door. The deadbolt shifted against the metal plate. I told the dispatcher someone was trying to break in. There was a third kick. Wood splintered around the lock. Then, I heard heavy footsteps running down the hallway toward the stairwell. I stayed locked in my bathroom until the police arrived. When they got there, the hallway was empty. The door frame was cracked straight down the middle. The officer told me if the deadbolt had been installed even slightly looser, the door would have caved in. They took a report and checked the area, but they didn't find the girl or the guy hiding with her. The cop told me it was a common tactic. They use someone who looks harmless to get you to open the door, and the second you unlock it, the person hiding forces their way inside. I broke my lease the next morning and moved back in with my parents for the rest of the year. I never found out who those people were or what they planned on doing if they got inside. But I never answered the door anymore, no matter who sounds like they need help on the other side. I was 27 when this happened. I was renting a small, single-story house from a family friend in a relatively quiet subdivision. At the time, I worked overnight shifts at a data center, so my sleep schedule was completely backward. On my days off, I was usually awake until the sun came up, just playing video games or watching movies in the dark. The neighborhood was safe enough, but the streetlights were pretty sparse, so it got pitch black outside at night. I didn't have a garage, so I always parked my car in the driveway right next to the front porch. It was around 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in the living room when I heard a loud, authoritative knock at the front door. It was 4 heavy, solid hits. It freaked me out a bit because of the time. I paused my game and walked over to the door. I looked through the peephole. Standing on my porch was a man in a dark blue uniform shirt. He had a silver badge on his chest and a thick utility belt. He looked exactly like a police officer. My immediate thought was that something had happened to a family member, or there was some kind of emergency in the neighborhood. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches, leaving the security chain attached. I asked him if everything was all right. He shined a small flashlight at my face for a second, then lowered it. He said he was responding to a report of suspicious activity on my street. Then he pointed toward my driveway. He told me the trunk of my car was popped open and the driver's side door was sitting unlocked. He asked me to grab my keys and step outside to verify if anything had been stolen from the vehicle. I figured I must have accidentally hit the trunk release button on my key fob while it was in my pocket. It had actually happened once or twice before, so it didn't seem impossible. I told him I would grab my keys and be right out. He nodded and took a step back off the porch, waiting. I shut the door and walked into the kitchen. I always left my keys on the counter near the sink. The window above the sink looks out directly over the driveway. Before going outside, I peeked through the blinds just to see if the inside of my car was messed up. That's when it clicked. My car was sitting perfectly still. The trunk was completely shut tight. The interior dome light was off. I looked past my car toward the street, expecting to see a police cruiser with its running lights on. There was nothing. Just a dark, unmarked pickup truck parked across the street with the engine off. I slowly backed away from the window. The house was completely quiet. A few seconds later, there was another knock at the front door. It wasn't loud and authoritative this time. It was just a soft tapping on the wood. I didn't make a sound. Then I heard him speak through the gap in the door frame. His voice was completely different now. It was calm and quiet. He just said, "I know you're getting your keys. Come outside." My chest felt tight. I backed into the hallway where there were no windows and grabbed my cell phone. I dialed 911 and whispered to the dispatcher that there was a man impersonating a police officer trying to get me to leave my house. While I was on the phone, the handle on the front door slowly turned. It hit the lock and stopped. Then it jiggled violently for a few seconds. I held my breath. After a moment, I heard heavy boots jog down the wooden porch steps and crunch across the gravel in the driveway. A real patrol car showed up about 10 minutes later. By the time they arrived, the truck across the street was gone. The officers walked around my property with flashlights. They told me my car was locked and totally untouched. When I described the uniform to the officer, he said it sounded like a generic security guard outfit you could buy online or at a surplus store. They took a report and drove around the area, but they didn't find the guy. I don't know what his plan was, or if he had other people waiting in that truck. But I know he didn't want my car. If he wanted to steal something, he would have just broken the window and taken it while I was inside. He wanted me to open the door and walk outside into the dark. I moved my keys to my bedroom nightstand after that, and I still don't answer the door late at night, no matter what the person on the other side is wearing.